President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed the Competition Amendment Bill into law. The legislation seeks to strengthen regulations against anti-competitive behavior in industrial markets. Economic Development Minister Ebrahim Patel has campaigned fiercely for the bill's codification. To give us some analysis on the bill, economist Sam Rolland joins us now to talk about it all. Sam, thank you so much for coming through. So what for you would be the top line? What will be different? We've seen collusion and cartel behavior, anti-competitive behavior in a number of sectors. Construction, there was an investigation in the meat industry, and as we speak, that ongoing investigation in as far as the forex industry, the banks are concerned there. What will be different this time around with this bill coming into law?
Thanks for having me on today. I think there are an interesting number of changes that we've seen coming out of the bill. Firstly, it's quite novel. We haven't seen this anywhere else in the world, so we don't really have an example to go by. But what's interesting is it's really hard-coded into the bill and into competition practice, the idea of public interest, that promotion of small enterprises, historically disadvantaged businesses, are taking preference in this in terms of their approach to anti-competitive behavior. And it's ensuring that historically disadvantaged, smaller black-owned businesses are not excluded from the mainstream and the productive sectors of the economy, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at it. And it's sure to be provoke a lot of debate, I think, over the coming months.
So let's get into some of the provisions, I think, one at a time. Let's start with the penalties. I found this very interesting, and I think this is why I'm starting with it, that currently one of the penalties could be 10% of revenue of the offending firm or company. There's a proposal to increase that if the company offends again, if this is a repeat thing. What's the proposal there?
Well, it looks like the conditions are certainly harsher. As far as I know, we had a sort of yellow card system before that's been done away with. And it's, I think, for a good reason. We've seen offending firms often are likely to offend again. Just the nature and the structure of our economy promotes that sort of thing. So the harsher penalties are likely to discourage any sort of anti-competitive behavior from reforming. Will this drive down investment? I think this is a key thing we need to look at. Will firms be scared away by these harsher penalties to a point where they say, we're not going to reinvest in the country and we're not going to reinvest in productive assets, we might just taper off.
But surely they shouldn't be, Sam. I mean, the proposal is, the fine will be 25% of the firm's turnover in South Africa if it's a repeat offense. Surely they shouldn't be put off from investing. They're not coming here to engage in anti-competitive behavior.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we look at things like the construction industry, we saw, and I hope I don't have any friends in the construction industry, but we saw the sort of levels of collusion in the World Cup construction of stadiums and similar activities. Now, we saw the appropriate level of punishment taken in that regard, and since then the construction industry in the country has taken a significant downturn, and we've seen a number of companies enter into business rescue. Now, that suggests an industry that isn't at its peak, that's really needing to consolidate, reassess their activities in the country. And we've seen construction hasn't been doing well since pre-World Cup, and the World Cup was a sort of boost for construction, but since then has taken a much weaker trend. Now, are firms likely to then reevaluate their position in the country, and especially international firms looking to merge with local firms here? Are they looking to reassess how they're going to do business? And it might be more hands-off than we saw before, and I think that needs to be looked at quite seriously.
Actually, you mentioned that whole idea of mergers, and that's because there are specific provisions in the new bill that's now been signed into law by the President. Take us through some of the main highlights. So basically, government is not taking a backseat in as far as mergers are concerned. They're actively interested. How does it play out?
I think we need to think about this in terms of two main key points in this. The first one is that the President has the ability to step in when we look at international mergers and mergers and acquisitions. So if the President feels that this isn't in the interest of economic stability or economic growth, he can step in and sort of intervene in any sort of international merger. Is this a good thing? We have seen before that many countries use this on the international trade front. We call it the infant industry argument, where they say that, yeah, let's say, for example, South Africa needs to develop its agriculture industry, and it'll block any sort of imports into the country. Now, the danger with this is, well, we could argue for the same thing when international investors, let's say in retail or so, are looking to come in and buy a South African firm to develop its footprint on the African continent. We might have, we know we have a very pro-business president at the moment under Cyril Ramaphosa, but we hope that consecutive presidents might not take a more bearish approach to that and block any sort of foreign interference, which might be ultimately good for the country. The other thing I also want to touch on is the sort of powers of the minister under the new bill, and that's that the minister can also institute an inquiry into certain markets. Is this a good thing? We then see it possibly will blur the line between the political side of it and the business side of it, that we're giving the executive branch a lot more power. Again, we hope for a pro-business minister in this regard, but we might see, and I think there's a perfect example with the recent discussions around Eskom, that breaking up Eskom into separate units, not privatizing, just breaking them up, has already been met with a huge amount of backlash from organised labour. And this would have put a lot of pressure on the Public Enterprises Minister. I just worry that we might see a similar case in that the Enterprises Minister gets put under similar pressure.
Economist Sam Rolland, thank you so much for coming through and sharing your perspectives in as far as the just signed competition amendment bill is concerned.